welcome to the newest episode of Short is the New Long. Your co-hosts are authors Adam Stump and Greg Krojak.
Hi, I'm Adam, and I am joining you from sunny September, northwestern Pennsylvania, and I am joining you after beating a head cold. So I might be raspy and coughy and snotty, but I am happy to be with you today.
And I'm Greg, and I haven't got a head cold, but I do have a yard which is very, very muddy at the moment, so I can't even go out if I want to, because somebody's relaying a waste pipe or something. So you're stuck with me for however long it takes.
Love it. Love it. Well, Greg, I don't know about you, but I am really excited to record this episode because we're going to be talking about some of the differences between short and long stories. And half of the topic today is actually on one of my favorite things, and that is short stories and writing short stories, and not just writing, but also editing and publishing short stories. And so that's sort of what I do. And so I'm really excited to talk about that. And I'm also excited to hear your angle of it, which is the opposite.
I've only written, now I've written 4 short stories because I accidentally wrote one on Wednesday night.
It's funny when the muse hits you, you have to listen to it.
Well, yeah. I mean, I stayed up until I think 2:30 in the morning, which was totally unplanned. But I think it's turned out quite well. But as I say, I've only written 4. I've never tried to publish any of them as such. So I'm hoping to learn some stuff as well.
Well, I think that the first thing that we need to learn is what really defines short stories and the flip side of the coin, which is the novel. And I mean, the very basic categories are short stories are short and novels are long. But
okay,
you know,
should we finish the podcast now?
That's right. We're at grade school level right now. But you know, some people have a question. Well, what makes a short story short, or a short story? How many words? How many pages? I was just reading on Facebook actually today. Someone was asking about page. You know, does 1,000 words make a page, or how many pages is a short story? And it's not really that. A lot goes into it, but at the very basic level, short stories can be broken down into a couple sections, and novels can too. And Greg, I'll let you talk about novels and what makes the difference between like a novella and a short novel or a long novel. But short stories, anything from a drabble, which is 100 words, to microfiction, which is usually 500, and flash fiction, which is 1,000, to the short story. And short stories can be anything between 1,000 and 20,000 words. Most smaller publications or magazines that like shorter publications, they usually have the cutoff at 10,000 words. But even you know, less than that, I've submitted to publications where 7,500 words is the cutoff. And even if you submit a story of 5,000, 6,000, 7,000 words, different magazines might actually print it in 2 segments over 2 issues. And several of my stories have been published that way. Even maybe 4,000 or 5,000 word stories get chunked into 2,500 or 3,000 words per issue. So when we're talking short stories, we're really talking about a story that can be read in a short period of time. Maybe 15 or 20 minutes is usually what publishers are looking for. But Greg, what are publishers usually looking for in the realm of novels?
Well, if you're talking traditional publishers, I think they like at least 75 or 80,000 words. Of course, this is where self-publishing has been a godsend to many of us, because we don't necessarily, I think we'd all like to be traditionally published. We'd all like to get that advance and get some decent money in. But that's not going to happen for most of us. So it's given us a lifeline. the self-publishing. Mr. Amazon, thank you. I appreciate that. But there are many reasons why you might not want to traditionally publish as well. I mean, because I'm 63. Don't tell anybody, but I'm 63, and I've written maybe 10 short novels now. And if I went through the process of trying to submit them to a literary agent, then I find a literary agent who accepts me, then he or she goes looking for a publisher. That could be a long process. I might actually die before it gets published. Totally different from your side of things. It's much more immediate. And you're not going to find a traditional publisher who's going to take say a 5,000 word short story. So that's a main difference. That's a big difference. The actual content, I suppose the fact is that if you're writing a novella or a short novel or even a regular sized novel, you, as we said before, our fantastic epiphany that short stories are short and novels are long.
Keep it
simple, have more
right?
space. Yeah, exactly. You have more space. You have more space to develop plots, etc. You can wander off on subplots. You can't do that with a short story. You have to stay where you are. Wednesday nights, actually, the one I wrote on Wednesday night actually takes place probably within a space of 6 hours. I don't see it would be difficult to have a novel where it takes place in 6 hours. I'm not saying it doesn't happen. In a novel, it's very difficult to do that. A short story forces you to be economical.
That's right. Yeah.
But those are main differences, I think.
I think you're right. And that's actually now I will say, going back to your point about novels, and traditionally, novels are longer, at least 80,000 words, and a lot of publishers went over 100,000 words. Our listeners will probably be a little bit more interested in shorter novels, and so we have set our limit to something around 60,000 words. And I think, one of the things you touch on there is definitely subplots. You can't really have that many in short stories. Since short stories are designed to be read in one sitting, they're really designed to bring the reader through one experience and sort of hit one point. Now, you can, have many sub-points or purposes in writing your short story, but you're really telling one story at one point in time. And I think that that's really the beauty of the short story is, as you said before, economy. And you have to bring a reader through some type of emotional response or some sort of intellectual assent, and that can either be to agree with or disagree with the premise of the story. But you've got to do that in literally just a few thousand words. And so in a novel, you have tens of thousands of words to do this, to develop the character or to bring the reader through a range of emotions. However, with a short story, you just have a few thousand words to do the same thing to get some sort of a response from the reader. And it really does make you not just practice, but really hone the craft of writing and really perfect your skills as a storyteller. So I don't think that writing novels or short stories in and of itself is more or difficult than the other. I think that it's just maybe a different way of practicing and using those skills, because the flip side of that coin is when you write a novel, you can't just fill it with fluff. You still have to use the right words. It's just that you have a lot more space to fill. So how do you fill that space with quality content as well as quantity?
Yeah, I mean, I think maybe if you start off writing novels, I was just thinking, is it more difficult to move into writing a short story? Possibly not for me personally, because my novels are short. They're usually between 40 and 50,000 words. So I don't have the distance to travel to get down to a short story. But if somebody's used to writing perhaps 90,000, 100,000, 110,000, I would have thought that it would be quite difficult, because they're used to the luxury of having the space to work in, and they know that actually even if say 100,000 words isn't sufficient for what they want to say, they can stop the novel, write book 2. And you don't normally, well, with a short story, I suppose you don't normally have a story 2, a story 3, a story 4, because then you'd end up with a novel.
That's right. Yeah. You're right. And, when you're writing novels or anything longer, novellas and things like that, you have paragraphs to describe characters. In short stories, you have sentences. And so you have to be really careful, and you have to be a wordsmith, really. In both cases, you have, when you're writing a novel, you have to use more words, but without being verbose. And in writing short stories, you have to have economy of words without having it be all clippy and choppy. And both skill sets really require a lot of honing. And something that probably a lot of people don't realize is many famous authors got their start not by writing novels, but by writing short stories. Some of my favorite sci-fi authors, Ray Bradbury, Harry Harrison, Robert Heinlein, these people, Isaac Asimov, they didn't sit down one day and say, I'm going to write a novel. They sat down one day and they wrote short stories, and they would get these short stories published in magazines back when there were print magazines that actually published short stories and paid for them. And, one of my favorite stories is Ray Bradbury used to sell newspapers on a street corner. And he did that until he made as much money selling short stories as he did selling newspapers. Nowadays, you could probably make more money selling newspapers than you could selling short stories. But, but that's a good way to hone your craft, is learning through writing. And I think that, in a lot of our writers groups, there are a lot of people who have never written a short story. They've never written a poem. They've never written an essay. Instead, they wake up one day and say, I'm going to be a writer. And they sit down and they clack away at their keyboard till they have 150,000 words. And they've written this huge novel. And what they find out is usually your first novel is pretty much, unsellable, because you haven't learned the ins and outs of proper writing. And you
don't even know who you are.
That's right. That's right. And what
in writing, we talk about a voice, and they haven't found their voice.
That's right.
I think the first novel is great, putting you in the right direction to find your voice.
That's right. That's right. But, I tell people all the time, if you want to get started, don't start with a novel, because you're going to invest 100,000 words of your life trying to find out who you are, and it'd be better to invest 10,000 in a short story. It's, it's a lot less of a loss if nobody wants to publish it. And, case in point, my own first short story that I wrote, it went through a really, really huge critical revision before it was publishable. But it really took a lot of editing and revision to it after I learned more about writing. Because, I must have written 30 stories after that one before I figured out what was wrong with that one, so that I could go back and make it publishable. If you invest 4 hours of your life and 6,000 words in something, and 50 people reject it, it's a lot less cruel and punishing than if you invest.
It'll probably stop you writing anything else.
Yeah, that's right.
It'll probably stop you writing anything else.
It will. And Ray Bradbury said, if you want to write, he said, write a short story every single week of your life. And he said, there is no way on earth that a human being can write 52 short stories in a year, and every single one of them is absolutely horrible. He said, eventually you will write a good story. I think that's wise. And, a lot of short stories have become novels, or at least novellas and things like that. And Ray Bradbury's Fahrenheit 451 immediately comes to mind. It started out as a short story called The Pedestrian, and then The Fireman. And then he turned it into a novel, and one of his most famous novels at that. In a short story, you can definitely have too many characters, too many points of view. You can have too much dialogue. You can have too many intellectual points. You really have such a limited amount of time. You have to really decide what is going to be the one or two main characters, the one or two main themes that I get across to my readers, and how am I going to use these few thousand words to do that? With a novel, you can speak a little bit more to this. You can have more characters. You can have more subplots. You can have more intellectual points that you want to make in the story. And how exactly do you do that, Greg? And how do you keep all that straight with your characters and your really your thrusts that you want going in your novels?
Well, I mean, we're both pantsers, as we mentioned last episode. Well, I imagine that if you're a planner, if you're a plotter, it's quite easy because you have documented records of who your characters are, of what they're like, their behavior. You know everything about them, whereas we just have uninvited guests, really. But as a pantser, how do I keep control? I let them do their own thing to a large extent. I never rein my characters in. I mean, in the Recon Chronicles, the main bad guy in the first book, he suddenly announced to me that he had multiple sclerosis. And I thought, well, I didn't know that, but actually that gives him a reason for how something he does later, he's probably going to do later on.
So with a main character who discloses something so vital as this life-altering disease, what do you do with that? In a short story, if I'm writing that, my character says, I'm sick with an illness that is going to alter my entire life. I basically have to say, and so had MS, and just drop it in the lap. What do you do with that in a novel? Does that become a subplot, or is that something that is just added to the character? Is that something you decide in the moment, since you are a pantser, or do you say, well, this is going to go into a short story, which is backstory that I'm going to publish later? I mean, what do you do?
Well, in this particular situation, because I'd kind of written ahead. And then he suddenly, whilst I was somewhere else in the story, he said to me, oh, you do know that I've got MS or ALS or whatever it's called now. And I thought, no, you haven't told me that. And then I thought, but
surprise.
That explains a lot of things. Yeah, but surprise. But it gave a reason for why he was how he was. So it was really valuable information. So I couldn't just kind of say, okay, yeah, you're ill. Okay, fair enough. It actually was the driving force behind his behavior, not necessarily behind his ambition, but behind the urgency of his ambition. So in a novel, something like that is really useful. But as you say, in a short story, he might say that to you, and you're thinking, oh, I haven't got enough words. If I really let you run with this, you're going to turn into a novella or something, right. And I'm actually writing a short story.
This is something I was going to touch on later on in the episode, but I think we'll just talk about it right now. And it's specifically linked with the word that you just used, ambition. I think every author at some point grows in ambition. And even if you start, as I did, as a short story author, that leads you to wanting to write a novella or a novel or a series of novels. And you have these grandiose ideas, but maybe you say, well, I don't have the words for that, or I don't have the talent for that. I don't have the time for that. Case in point, the book that I just released, The Endless Summer, I wrote it without knowing that I was writing a book because it starts with... It started with a short story. It takes place in upstate New York in a little village, which is mirrored on the village that I grew up in upstate New York. And not everything that happens in the book happened in upstate New York, because if so, it would be an FBI investigation in process. But
names have been changed to protect the innocent.
That's right. We're all in the witness
and the guilty.
But what happened was, I wrote this short story, and I just had this idea. And it involves these boys, 10-year-old boys, and they make a discovery, a really bad, creepy discovery, which is actually based on a story that I heard about someone else when I was younger. It's based on a true story. All of these elements from my own life came into it, and when I was done with the story, it was definitely complete. But then these little boys, these 10-year-old boys, they came back to me and they said, "We have more stories to tell. Keep telling them." So I started writing more and more stories about these young boys. And before you know it, it became, a series of several short stories that all revolved around these same characters. And I said, this could be a book together. I mean, I could publish this as a collection of short stories. And then I thought, this is more than just a collection of short stories. This is the story of these boys' summer. And so my book, Endless Summer, was born. And I learned after I had already nearly completed it that several of my most favorite stories, novels, as you were, by Ray Bradbury, Dandelion Wine, Fahrenheit 451, Martian Chronicles, Something Wicked This Way Comes, all these stories started as short stories. These novels started as short stories, and it's actually something called a fix-up, where you fix up a bunch of short stories to go together. So what I did was I took the stories, and I'm trying to think. I actually think that every single short story that's in the Endless Summer has been published by another publisher, either online or in print. But what I did was, in between a lot of these short stories of about anywhere from 4,000 to 7,000 words, What I did was I wrote flash fictions of 500 to 1,000 words to join the stories.
That's cool.
So what I did was I wound up having almost 40,000 words in one book, but I didn't sit down and write 40,001 words in one sitting. What I did was I compiled chapters, not knowing they were chapters, because I was publishing them as short stories. And I think it's a really good way for someone who wants to write or has an ambition to write longer fiction, but they just can't stomach sitting down and writing a novel or a novella. You don't have to. You can write short stories with interrelated characters, and before you know it, you've got a longer story. You just have to work to put it together.
There's an author, P.A. Kane. He has a book which is just like you were saying with the Endless Summer. It's like a selection of short stories, but it actually is under the umbrella of going back through his life when he was younger, and the music that he listened to, and what it meant to him, and how it was important in his life. And any of those could be a short story in their own, on their own. But he's put them together, makes sense as a playlist. It's about music. It's about the music, this book. But it's very similar to what you were just saying, how you have these events or incidents, and they naturally come together.
I think that's a really good point. And single points like that, single life experiences, can become short stories. And short stories in that same vein can become novellas or novels. And I think that the difference there is, for me, when I wrote mine, the first story that I wrote for this collection actually turned out to be the last story in the book. Mm-hmm. And that was sort of the overarching umbrella, is this growing up, coming of age thing, which is almost a trope, 10-year-old boys coming of age, my goodness, it's almost been overdone. But when you take it and you consume it in chunks, you realize you don't just have to say, this is a boy's coming of age story. You can actually have subplots in that. which brings the reader gently, when we're talking about novella or novel-length stories, it brings the reader gently to an aha moment at the end where they say, oh my goodness, when I started reading this, I thought I was just going to read a work of fiction. I did not realize this is the journey of life that we're all on. And so I think that that's one of the beauties of it. With a short story, you basically can make one point with just one or two, maybe three main characters. Whereas with a novel, you can do significantly more than that. The short story is a short period of time. The novel is typically a much longer period of time, comparatively speaking. And so you have more time to develop these subplots in your story. And, like you, I have characters in my short stories that just walk in unannounced. And I'm just like, what on earth are you doing here? And you have to decide if you're going to let them in or throw them out. Whereas with, the novel, you can explore that a little bit. And, ultimately, if you decide it doesn't fit in the novel, you cut that section and you throw it on the floor. It might become something more later. But at the same time, you have that grace period with the longer writing that you can say, this is sort of a rabbit trail. I'm not going to go off on this right now. And you can save that to a different file on your computer or something like that, and then go back to your main story. But, with your work, Greg, as you write novels, and I know you're a pantser, but for me, writing short stories, I usually have one point, which is the hook at the end of the story. And that's my plot. That's it. My plot is get me to that end point. With you, and your novels do have some subplots in them and really good detail of characters, and you introduce characters and develop them throughout the stories. When you write, do you have an idea that you say, I've got these plots, I'm going to work together, or do you just say, here's a good story, I'm going to write it and see what happens?
Well, I was just thinking that I liked your use of the word point, because it's very relevant to the short story. But in my work, in novellas and short novels, I have a theme rather than a plot. And I think by having a theme, it actually allows you to wander off a little, as long as you're still keeping to the theme. Point and theme are excellent dividers of the two, I think, because with a theme, you have the umbrella, and with a point, you have the point of the umbrella. You can stab somebody with your umbrella, whereas with my umbrella, I can shelter somebody.
He shelters them. I kill them.
Yeah.
I think you've really summed up the first part of our conversation perfectly with, the difference between point and theme. And you really, when I read a novel, I want to be encapsulated into that novel. But when I read a short story, I really do want to be poked. I want to be prodded. The short story has to be really pithy and poignant. And it's not that a novel doesn't have to be those things, but the novel has to really encompass an awful lot more than just one jab. Because if you invest your life in 100,000 words of reading, and that novel turns out to be a one-trick pony, you're going to be really disappointed. Now, something I'd like to talk about now is, and this is something that you and I were talking about earlier in private, but, publishing. Publishing, when we talk about audience, when we talk about publishers and things like that, there's huge differences between short stories and novels or novellas. And as you pointed out at the beginning, it's going to be a tough sell to get a traditional publishing house to publish a short story, mainly because
very tough.
Yeah, there's not much call in the traditional big house publishing companies for short story anthology. There are a lot of indie publishing houses out there that publish short story anthologies still, but basically, you have to look at more academic resources nowadays. Now, I will say this: you can make money doing indie publishing house publishing. You can make money doing that. Some of them pay $5, $10 a story. Some of them pay per word. And so if you're really cranking them out, you can do it. And if you're really, really dedicated, you can make a living. But most people are not that dedicated. And for most people, writing is more of a hobby that they add to their day job. You and I both have day jobs that primarily pay our bills. We are not going to be retiring, on an island. Well, not right now. Maybe, hopefully, I hope someday, retiring through writing. But really, you can be successful. You can get your name out there. You can get name recognition to the point where people ask you to submit stories to their publications. You have to work hard to make a name for yourself. A lot of it is branding. You really have to brand yourself, and you have to be willing, I think, to publish at least some of your content for free. And I have a really hard time with that because I don't think that you should just give your work away. If you're producing quality writing, you should get paid for it.
Writing is hard work.
It is. Writing and editing and getting something ready for publication, it takes a lot of time. And I think that just giving it away, when people ask an author to do something for free, I think it's rude.
The famous exposure. Oh, but you'll get exposure.
Yeah, exactly.
Exposure does not pay the bills.
That's exactly right. Exposure does not pay the bills. And so, I did that. And every once in a while, if I find a publication that I really, really like and they don't pay, I'll submit something to them. Just because I say, I want to be in their magazine. And it's not because they've asked me. It's just because I say, hey, I really like that. I have a lot of respect for their magazine. I want to do this. But when people say, hey, can you just give me a story for free? And then they wind up making off with profits. And even if they make off with, $50 in Amazon sales, that's just rude. Now, if they're money for charity, I've freely submitted to charitable anthologies. I have no problems with that because you're actually raising money for a cause.
Exactly.
But, as short story authors, the temptation is always going to be, give your stuff away, give it away, give it away, give it away. To the point where people begin expecting all of your stuff to be free. And if your stuff is really good, and if people really want your stuff, then they should want to pay. I'm not saying that they're going to pay you $200, $300, $400, $500 a story, but $5, $10. I mean, come on, you can throw the dog a bone. So getting works published when you're first starting out as a short story author, you really have to, you have to take two approaches. Either A, I'm just going to dump my work out there as much as I can, get it published for free in as many places as I can so that I just get name recognition. Or, and that's how I started, by the way. I started by just, I had 6 stories, and I said, I'm just going to submit these to 10 different publications every week. And it was exhausting work. Or you can do this. This is the second option. And this is what I've begun doing. I actually started reading online journals and online magazines and e-zines. And I read a lot of them. And I just read and read and read and read. And I'll tell you what, for every story you publish, you'd better read 5 or 10. And so what I did was I began reading all of these online publications that publish short stories. And so what I did was I started looking at my stories, and I thought, which of my stories would fit that publication well? And so what I did was I went from, an acceptance rate of maybe 5 or 10% to submitting stories geared towards the magazines that I was reading. And I went up to probably anywhere from a 65 to a 70% acceptance rate, which I think is pretty good. So basically, for every 3 stories that I submit, 2 of them get accepted and 1 gets rejected. And what I've done is I've begun submitting mainly to paid publications. And so what's happened is, I haven't made a ton of money doing it, but I've made some money, and I feel very good about that. And by the way, the money that I make goes towards my children's schooling, so it's not like I'm, lining my pockets or anything like that. The money that I make as an author, because I believe in education, I give it to the school that my boys attend. And I figure, they can buy books for their students and things like that. So it's a good way to raise money for my own cause, but also it's a good way for me to feel better about my writing because I'm getting a lot more acceptances from my submissions. And so if you really want to make a name for yourself and you really want to get more acceptances, you have to do a lot of hard work, and that hard work involves reading. and you just have to read a lot, and you have to see what type of work people are submitting or accepting for their publications, and you have to start submitting that. So really, the key to getting submission or acceptances to your submissions, and the key to really getting a name for yourself is read the publications, see what they like to print. And if you write the type of stuff that they like to print, send it to them. And if they don't, move on to a magazine that does. And eventually you're going to find a niche for your writing, and eventually you're going to find a publication that's going to print your story. And so that's sort of how I've learned to do it as a short story author. First, I took the shotgun approach, and I got several stories published that way. But it was really frustrating because I got I got a lot more rejection letters than I got acceptance letters doing it that way. But then I learned how to hone my craft as far as submitting. And I actually feel much more successful in my submissions now. I don't submit to nearly as many places, but what I can tell you is I get a lot more acceptances. That makes me feel good. Now, Greg, you have not had a book published by a major publishing house, but you've published an awful lot on Amazon and other places through your own self-publishing. So when you do that, what are you looking to accomplish when you publish in terms of audience? Is there a way that you have to gauge who's going to read your book? Have you learned anything about marketing through doing your own self-publishing and self-promoting?
I didn't know about something called writing to market until I actually started writing books myself and self-publishing them on Amazon. And a lot of authors do write to market. If I want to be a billionaire, that's what I have to do. But I don't think I would actually enjoy my writing so much if I did that. I write the books that I want to read. I write the stories that I want to read. I can't imagine. I mean, I know people do it, and I think it's great, and they're very successful. But I can't see myself writing to market. I have an idea, and I think, well, I would like to know what happens in this story. So I write it. I'm certainly no marketing expert. I'm still muddling my way through. I'm actually concentrating more on my author branding now rather than individual books. So I don't know if that will be successful, but I think when you've got a number of books written and published, I think maybe that's the way you ought to go, is actually promoting your branding.
Well, Greg, I think those are all great points, and I just have to say, sort of my closing remarks here. I think we've really covered the breadth of difference between short story and novel. But just to talk about this podcast a little bit, one of the reasons why you came up with the idea for this podcast and why I was so on board with it was visibility. And I'm not just talking about visibility for our work. I'm talking about visibility for tons of other authors who write short reads. There are many people out there who are fantastic authors who write only short stories or novellas or short novels. If publishing houses really only want to publish 80, 100, 120, 150,000 word novels, there are many authors out there who aren't going to get a piece of the pie. But that's something our podcast wants to do, is showcase those authors and really showcase that type of writing, because I think that's really appealing to a lot more modern readers. Short reads are more appealing to modern readers who don't have as much time to sit down and read a 150,000 word novel. So the last little bit that I want to say really is about marketing for any author listening to this. This isn't so much for readers, but for authors. In the Facebook groups we're on, in the forums we're on, with the blogs that we start and read, a lot of those groups and forums and blogs are really geared towards authors, and most of the members of those groups are authors. And I think one of the things that many authors miss is they try to market their books towards other authors. And the point is, other authors don't have an unlimited amount of resources, And even though they like to read, many authors scrounge around and try to get as many books for free as they possibly can. So if you're trying to sell your books, writing to other writers sort of, is a vicious cycle that is not going to result in much success, but a lot of frustration. So I think that what we have to realize is, as authors, we have to link ourselves to readers and a group of readers who will want to read whatever we write. And so that's one of the reasons why we created this podcast, was actually to join together both authors and readers. And I know I have several readers on my Facebook page that have said, hey, I'm a reader, not a writer, but I'm going to listen to this podcast because I want to hear more about it. And I think that's one of the reasons why we do this, and also why we have the special episodes. We have interviews with authors. Maybe we're going to interview an author that a reader loves to read, and they want to know more about that author. But we're also going to have readings by authors. And I think that for a lot of readers, they're going to really enjoy hearing their authors read the stories that they've already read. And so I think that this podcast is a really great opportunity for readers and writers to get together. And I really hope it creates visibility, and it creates successful writers, but also satisfied readers. And I think that that's something that really is a beautiful thing. And I look forward to how that's going to happen in the future.
Yes, exactly. I mean, we're at the very beginning of our journey at the moment. We already have at least 3 authors interested. 2 have already sent in their recordings. People out there listening to this podcast, they quite probably have never heard of them, but they'll listen. Hopefully they'll listen to the readings, and they'll think, first of all, that's a really good story, or that excerpt the guy or girl just read, that's really good. I think I might take a look at the rest of the book, which is obviously perfect for the author, because then they get a sale. Hopefully we're going to be a conduit between authors and readers. Hopefully that person who likes that story or likes that excerpt, who buys the book, will tell their friends. They'll say, this is something you really need to read. Most of us are invisible. We're not Dean Koontz. We're not Ray Bradbury. We're not Isaac Asimov. The listeners will have to excuse us if we tend to talk about science fiction writers. Not so much on your part, but my part, because I am a science fiction writer. Visibility. We want to help other authors, not just us, other authors gain visibility. And we want listeners to find out how great these authors are and spread the word.
That's right. And I found a really simple way to do that is, on my Facebook page, I have a place where I share links. And I specifically say, we can't all buy every book, but we can share links to those books. And if a handful of readers on my page see your link, then I hope that they buy it. And then if a handful of readers on your page see my link, I hope that they buy it. And so I think that that's one way that we can work together, is networking. And it's not so much about making money or anything like that, but it's really about getting quality reading material into the hands of readers and validating the mission of many short read authors. And I think that that's the beauty of this podcast, because we already have readers and writers subscribed to it. And I think that that's only going to grow. So I look forward to where the future takes us. And I look forward to hearing from our listeners, whether they are writers or readers, and hearing why they enjoy short fiction.
So thanks for listening, everybody. And I hope you'll join us again next Tuesday. In between the main episodes, there will be bonus episodes, which will mainly be readings, author readings, but also, as we said earlier, if the listeners send in something that they'd like to tell people about, that's where you'll find those as well.
Thanks for listening, everyone, and we'll be back next Tuesday.
Good night.
Thanks for listening to Short is the New Long. Be sure to subscribe to get the latest episodes updated every Tuesday.